For the next few videos, I'm going to be doing a lot of prototyping. That's where I build a rough scene without any detailed assets or models and things like that, just some basic primitive objects like you have here. Your cube, your sphere, and your capsule. I'm going to be creating scenes just to test our scripts out on objects before I spend hours and days building a scene, importing all these models, and then finding nothing works. So the quick and easy way is just to do prototyping. So for that, we do at least need some assets. We're going to need some textures, some kind of images to put on our surfaces, just so we can get a feel of our scene without spending too much time building it up. Okay, so in the assets video, I did show a few reference links of places where you could find your own textures, materials, models, and other types of assets. Or otherwise, simply search. Okay, type in a search string like Tileable Textures. Okay, and we have some links here. Even the first one here. Go through, we'll find a whole bunch of useful different textures and things. Now just be aware, basic rule is, if you didn't make it, you don't own it. So for example, if I try and right click on this one, we have some rights. You'll see the same thing in license agreements in the Unity store assets. So most of the time when you see free, it can indeed mean free for non-commercial use. Means while I'm sitting at home here, I can use all these textures all day happily. I'm not selling them, I'm not putting them into a project, I'm not making money of them. They're not commercial. So just be aware of all your license agreements. Like I said, the basic rule is if you didn't make it, you don't own it. Unless you have a license agreement that states that you are free and happy to use it in commercial and non-commercial use, right? I'm not a lawyer, so that's as far as I'm going there. So yeah, that's how you can search and even filter our searches out. And just using that simple string there, you can see there's a wealth of different textures here we can use. And as I said, when you go to the website, do make sure that you do have the rights to use those textures. And if you're looking for something more specific, just change your search string. There we have it. Okay, so there's a whole wealth of resources out there just waiting for you to go and find them. Okay? So where do we find out some information on our textures and materials and how to use them with Unity? Go to our Unity documentation and the user manual. Come down a little. Here we are sitting quite clearly. We have textures, materials, and shaders. So if we open up the textures, this is actually quite in-depth. Okay, we have some import settings that we have to take care of for our textures so that they look right in our game. And here's all the related information to every part of our import settings. Now I'm just going to quickly show a couple of them there because this is quite detailed. You probably just want to know the basics to start, but here is where you find out about it. So, I've already created some folders. I've already created my materials and my textures folder. So I want to bring some textures that I found on the internet and a couple from the Angry Bots project, and I'll bring them into Unity. So let's just right click in Unity, show in Explorer, and I believe it's Reveal in Finder for Apple users. And there we have it. We're inside our project. And we're inside the assets folder of our project where all our assets live, our scripts, everything. I'm just going to open up that folder. Now, got a few different types, so I'll just grab them. Okay, so I put them in the folder outside of Unity. You could also drag them and drop them into the new folder. Because I had a few, I just dragged them here. And now you can see Unity needs to take time and recognize these assets and import them. the moment. There's quite a few there, and a couple of them are quite large. And there we have it. Unity, just make some space. So now Unity has recognized those two folders I dragged in, and it can see all these textures. Now here, if we click on a texture, we can see our inspector settings, our import settings in the inspector. So basically, just to check, there's one I've already done. We want to reference with the information of our texture. So for there I've got the plywood. There's my plywood on the computer. Okay, so that's got an odd dimension. That's 350 by 350, but it is square. So if we look at our import settings here, that's 350. That's below 512. So we'll set that. I'm going to set that to true color also and hit apply. Now, this is set to the resolution that's closest to the image. Probably wasn't a great one to start on. Some odd sizes here. Okay, the tileable. Here we go. This one was 1024 by 1024. So I simply apply true color, and this is a true rendition of the image. So what if you have an odd shaped image? So for example, I've got one here. No more seamless background. Okay, I've already been playing with this. Okay, this is my second take, so I'll just have to take a step back and show you from the beginning. Okay, so when we first come to our inspector settings for this texture, this is what it's going to be presented as. Now, if I look at my dimensions here, they're 400 by 300, so it's definitely odd. And it's also not a factor of 2, a power of 2, so it's not 256, 512, 1024, 400. So we go to the closest highest number there, 400, that's 512. Now if I did like I did before, just hit apply, it's actually resized my texture to a power of 2. That's actually flattened compared to what I have there. So it should be higher. So how do we fix that? I actually have to go to advanced texture settings here, and there's the power of 2 I was talking about, 128, 256, 512. I'm going to set that to none. Now if we hit apply, see that's been rescaled? Now that is true to the scale of my original image there. Okay, so if you're using odd shaped images, set your maximum size to the largest size, whether it be the height or the width. Say if this was 700 high and 200 wide. 700, we'd want to set it to 1024, the longest, for the maximum. Okay, so that's for your odd shaped ones. Now there's a couple of special ones I've got in here too. Yes, I will hit apply because I set it, then I reset it. So let's just check that again. It's none power of 2, 512 for the largest size, automatic, yep, that's all fine. Okay, so going into further, you can have normal maps or bump maps that supplement your image. And again, I've already done this in the previous one. I'll just bring that back. Okay, so this is how you would see it, your normal map, when you first come into Unity. Now, this is not the actual image. This is a normal map of the image. It's kind of, let's have a look at Unity, how they describe this. So back to our documentation, user manual, materials and shaders. And here we see it, another wealth of information on how these textures and materials are applied. And this is what's doing the work between the texture and the normal map, is the shader. What shader we apply. So if I looked at bump diffused, you can see what's happening there. With a normal map, it the shader will give a sense of depth. It will make calculations and it will render your flat texture based on the image of your normal map. So it gives a flat image already a sense of depth and 3D-ness to it. So we need to import our normal maps as normal maps. So again, first check the scale. I'm working with panel D. It's 256, so let's set that. Now the texture is a normal map. Okay. Now it's not coming from grayscale, it's not black and white, so let's take that away. And we hit apply. Okay, so now Unity will recognize this as a normal map. That was 256, true color, hit apply. Okay, so we have all our materials, our textures. I'm already ahead of myself. Let's create some materials. Okay, so create material, name it, and there we have our inspector settings with our shader and a place for our texture to go. Now, to start off, you don't actually need a texture. We can just use material on its own. We can set the color here. Okay, so you can quite happily just apply colored materials to your surfaces. We want to bring in our texture. Simply drag and drop it in there. We have a preview window of how our texture will look with that shader, with the lighting. So that's setting up a material. Let's create an object to apply that to. Okay, so with our material, either with the object selected, you can drag it onto the inspector, or you can simply drag it and drop it on the object in the hierarchy. Okay, either of those will work. And there we have it. Now just say, for example, in our scene we decide that's too big and we want to actually repeat the texture. We want to tile it. So we have some tiling settings here. So as you see, I've now doubled that surface. I've doubled the image on the material. So when it renders on the surface, it is tiled there. See? Bring up even more. And there we go. So I'm tiling the material here. Now it's important to note in the import settings, texture is already set to repeat. Now what happens if I set it to clamp? There we go, you can see what's happened there. The texture is no longer tiling. We've said, okay, we don't want to repeat when we get to the end of the texture when we're tiling. We want to clamp it here. So it's just bled out the edge of those pixels out across the rest of the material. So we don't want that. So for tileable textures, make sure they're on repeat. And there we have it. Okay, so let's look at a different texture. For example, I've brought in some basic buttons. Okay, this is something that's just going to be used once on a surface. It's not going to repeat. So let's look at our import settings there. Of course, again, I've already gone through, and this is my second take. So I'll just set this back to as you would find it. Okay, so that's how you would see it when you first import. So we cross-reference. Check the scale of our texture. I've already labelled these at 256. True color, apply. And again, if your texture is not even, make sure you come to advanced and you select your power of 2 to none. So with a texture like this that we don't want to repeat, we don't want any artifacts or anything appearing off the sides. So we are going to set this to clamp. which I have done previously. Okay, so how does that work? So we've created a material for our button. Let's drag my texture over into my material. Now at the moment that's not quite sitting right, is it? If we applied that material, you can see, I want transparency. I don't want to be able to see this black area. So again, this is just all part of the shaders. If I click on shader, we'll come down to transparent, diffuse. There we go. We see it's all fixed up. That's now become transparent as per the transparency image information. There's a couple of shaders. Alright, let's look at the last one I brought in with a normal map. So let's create a material. Now, we'll go back to those images from the angry bots. Okay. So there's our texture, looking a little bit flat and lifeless. So let's change our shader up. Let's go to a bumped diffused. Here is where we can add the normal map to give our height reference to our texture. So the wall panel, we have this one here. I don't know if you can see it now, but that has actually applied some depth there. Makes those dark areas look like they're indented. Let's just change back to diffuse and see if we can see it. There we go. See how it's kind of like flattened out and went a bit dull? Go back to the bump diffuse. There we go. Let's see if we can create a big surface where we can see this definition. I'm using a wall tile as floor and a floor tile as wall. Let's zoom out a bit. Take those out of the way. That's already in that scope. Let's make it bigger. Okay, so we're working with our bumped normal material. I'll apply that to the floor. And again, that's an incredible scale, so let's set our tiling. Okay, there's our surface. So again, just to check, change it to normal diffuse. It's a bit hard to see here, but those surfaces did flatten out. Let's see if I can get this different color. What's going on? Let's go to a bump diffuse. It's very hard to see, but that actually has given it some depth. There is a better example in the documentation, apart from that one. There we go. All the different types of shaders available to Unity. And you can see what kind of effect that will happen to materials based on the shaders that you use. Okay, so just to wrap up on shaders, if you're interested in shaders and maybe there's something in the Unity default shaders that you can't really use or it's not quite suitable, now go to the Unity wiki, Unify community, and with all the links on the left there is one for shaders, and here are some shaders that people have written and contributed that you can use. See, one I've obviously gone to a few times. Starting to look at toon shaders, and team port shaders. Okay, so there's heaps of information there in the Unified community on the shaders. Also, you have the Unity forums. If you come down here, you'll see a room for shader labs. It's where people are writing shaders, talking about shaders, helping you with your shaders. So get into there and see what they're doing. And I haven't started yet, but when I want to learn about shaders and writing my own shaders, I'll be going over to Unity Gems. And here, with all the other amazing stuff they have, here's an introduction to shaders, basic information about how it works, and then gets into start programming and writing your own shaders and how to manipulate your shaders so you can have all these different effects happening, whether it be specular shiny kind of shader with the bump map involved, or just a bump map, or another one which isn't in the normal packs which I use from somewhere else is an unlit shader. Just say you want a shader that is not affected by light. You see, these are affected by light. If you've got text or GUI or something like that on a 3D object, don't want it affected by light, you use an unlit shader. So there's a wealth of information on shaders out there. So hopefully that's all made sense. Finding textures, importing your textures, creating a material using your textures, and then applying your texture, your material, to an object.